Before we start. Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Beth Robinette. I work for AVI, which is an organization that is dedicated to promoting regenerative agriculture, um, sound, holistic decision making, and really just trying to uplift people who are trying to improve things at the soil surface. And we are mostly based on the West Coast, but we kind of clearly draw people in from all over the place because I think we have kind of the entire United States represented on this call at least. Um, and it's my pleasure today to present to you Mr. Tony Malmberg, who is a dang good cowboy, a co-founder of the Savory Institute, a font of knowledge in really all things ecosystems and livestock, and someone that I feel very privileged to call a friend and a mentor. And today, Tony is going to share with us some of his knowledge about managing livestock in riparian systems. But before we get to that, I have a couple housekeeping things. Uh, okay, I gotta share my screen here. Here we go. Okay. Um, just want to let you know about a few upcoming offerings that Avi has. Um, so we have Introduction to Holistic Management that starts this Thursday. That's a 3-week course. It's only 99 bucks. We really just want to introduce people uh, to the basic concepts of holistic management, some of the key pieces of the framework, and that's sort of the prerequisite for all of the other online offerings that we have for the rest of the season. Um, we also have Holistic Plan Grazing coming up. That's going to be a 4-week series starting February 27th. Um, all of the rest of these classes are on a sliding scale, so it's pay what you are able to. Um, and we have holistic land planning, ecological monitoring coming up. Those are all the information on those is available on our website, which is avihub.com. I'll pop it in the chat in just a second, or if Andrea, you want to type it in there. Um, and then we also have two in-person courses coming up. We have Introduction to Holistic Management, Holistic Plan Grazing, and Ecological Planning. That's going to be taught by myself and my esteemed colleague, Katie Roberts. Uh, it's hosted at the Lazy R Ranch, which is where I'm calling in from, just outside of Spokane, Washington. That's June 16th through 20th. We're doing an introduction to holistic management and financial land planning, September 22nd through 26th. That's also taught by Katie and myself, also at the Lazy R. Information about all of those also on the website. Um, we have a really exciting offering for scholarships for those courses from Kiss the Ground, which is you have to apply through their website, and if you're approved, you get a code for I believe it's 75% off of any of those in-person trainings through a Savory Hub or through I'm blanking on who are the other there's something else you can I think it's Soil Health Academy. Don't quote me on that. I'll double check it. Information's on Kiss the Ground's website. But that's a great opportunity to defray the cost. And if you took both of those classes, you would be ready to be an accredited professional if you so chose. So, great opportunities coming up. And it'll also be a ton of fun because you get to hang out with me and look at my pretty cows. Uh, okay, one other upcoming thing, which is Andrea has a very cool webinar coming up on March 4th. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
That so I do a little bit of exit reviews for people wanting to be accredited professionals. And one of the question that I love to stump folks with is, what are the modes of the holistic management framework? And so we talk a lot about the management side of things, of finding like the planning processes of land planning, financial planning, and grazing planning is probably how most people come in. And but there's other ways to use the framework, and one is research design, and one is policy design. And so I'm really excited to do this webinar just to introduce folks to policy design. And that can be everything from how to design policies for your ranch or for your business, to city council, to big policy stuff that could affect multiple states, multiple areas. And so I'm going to just kind of introduce you all to that. It's always rooted in the ecological processes and getting people to create holistic context, understand what their whole under management is, and all of that, but putting it into a policy perspective. And then we will be, I don't know if we have the date. I think we have it. It's in October. We will then be teaching a master course in holistic policy design at our place in Union, Oregon. I think it's in September. I will let people hear on this. You'll find out.
Okay, perfect. Without further ado, I am gonna turn things over here to Tony. Um, if you have questions as we go through, we're going to share a short video. Tony's going to share some slides, and then we'll have time for Q&A at the end. So feel free to pop questions in the chat as we go along, and then we'll have time at the end to address those. Or if you want to come on camera and on mic and ask a question in person, we can do that. Um, so, Tony, one of my favorite humans and one of the smartest dudes I know. Uh, I'm gonna turn it over to you, sir. Is there anything you would like to say before we play this video as the introduction? You're muted. There we go.
Yes. So when people talk about riparian areas, they think everything is right there. Riparian areas are sexy. There's a lot of grass, there's trees, there's birds, there's deer, there's fish, there's ducks, there's all these things, and that's what people are excited about. And we sometimes think that that is where we can improve the riparian area. But it begins where this picture is right here. It begins up on the ridgetop. It begins with animal impact and getting the raindrop into the earth. So this video is in a place. Andrea and I bought this place 5 years before this video. This video is taken in the 6th year of grazing. It was used for 30 years prior to that as kind of a winter feedlot. Not exactly a feedlot, but they brought cattle in. They put up all the hay, and the cattle were on this riparian area all winter long, and then they were off in the summertime when they put up their hay. So that's the background of where this video is.
All right, and I will warn you the audio is a little quiet on this, so take a moment to adjust your speakers if you want to turn them up a little. We'll also send out the link to this afterwards.
No sound.
Okay, Beth, I think one thing that you need to do is go to your audio. You pause it for a second. You go to the video. In the video settings, I think that's where it is.
Well, gosh dang it. We did test the audio before this and it worked. Bear with us just a second, folks. Hmm.
There we go.
Do you have audio now?
Want to fence off riparian areas and exclude them from management rather than including them in management.
Anything?
So as we go through here, I can hear it. Yes.
Okay.
We can go back to our I can't hear it now.
It might be when you're muting yourself, Beth. That might be muting it. Maybe.
5 days.
Yeah, that's probably it.
Yeah. Okay.
Down the creek. So the first thing that you see happen as you get a handle on managing a riparian area and managing time and timing is now the video's not moving. When we go back to a paper written by Montana State University, everything working now. Years ago, that a riparian area grazed longer than 30 days will degrade. 21 to 30 days will maintain, and less than 21 days will improve. In my experience, if you can get that down to less than 10 days, it sure works a lot better. But you can see here, after 4 years, we have 100%. Well, not quite 100%, because we have right here, you don't see green grass next to the water. But going up, on both sides, you have that green grass right to the live water in the low flow. And that's critical, because that's what catches sediment and starts building the bank back. So there's probably a picture somewhere of what this looked like 5 years ago, but basically it was just gravel all the way across and just a little bit of water. So you can see that channel has narrowed up from about 30 feet to about 6 feet. It's still only a couple inches deep, so we want to see a 2-to-1 width depth ratio to get a deal. But to start with, why don't the rivers heal up? Because if the cattle were in here now, they would come in and they would graze this. And if they're here a long time, they come in every day and they tromp, knock that out and knock this dirt loose, and the dirt goes downstream, and then you just have rock again. But with this green line, we're going to catch sediment, and sometimes we don't see it here, but sometimes we'll see an algae or a moss right there that catches that sediment first year. But here we have some growth. It's going to catch some sediment. It's going to pick that up, and it's going to narrow the channel a little more next year. You go back, you can see how that progressed across here. We have woody seedlings coming in here. See all these woody seedlings? And if you had animals in here for long periods of time, that just would not happen. The first thing that comes in, like, okay, right here is a place you can see the algae. You have algae right there. So that will catch sediment. And you can see where it did last year. That algae caught sediment, and you have the sedge coming up through it. But before the sedge is the rush. The little round, short, prickly grass there. And then here's a big one. Rush is the first one. So then you get that established, holds the sediment, then you have the sedges come in. Get that established, comes in, and then you get more the dryland species and woody species. So as this develops, and you have animals in here less than 10 days, so they're not tromping this out, washing that downstream, it's going to narrow the channel. We'll get to a 2-to-1 width depth ratio, and then it's going to start raising the bed elevation. And eventually that bed elevation will get so it's reconnected to the floodplain. It'll get clear back up to where this bank is. But that's going to take 25, 30 years. I've seen it happen. It will happen. The thing about a functioning river is as it shapes, you get a series of a riffle, run, pool, glide. The riffle, like right here, is aerating the water. And then when you get right down here.
So where those rocks are, Tony, it's like that kind of a rapid, like a mini rapid.
Get down here, you have the run. So the run picks up speed and it plunges into the pool. And with that oxygen, that pool, it drives that oxygen into the far bank of the pool. Like in here. And that's where the fines drop out, and that's where salmon lay their eggs. And that oxygen is necessary for them to lay their eggs. And that's called the glide, where the fines drop out where they lay their eggs. And then you start over again. And you have another riffle. You have another run, and you have a pool and a glide. And these aren't very well developed. So we've just been doing this for 5 years. And there's probably a pool. This isn't a very good pool, but it is a pool. There's probably only a pool like every quarter mile or so. In a functioning river, you have that riffle, run, pool, glide, and you'll have like 8 pools per mile.
You guys are looking good.
So these will develop, and with construction, they'll really develop.
Send me more photos of
First came here, the
maybe Alana.
places that were really tromped out like this,
I miss you guys too.
and just covered the ground, gave it some ground cover and places to germinate some grass and get some root into the bank, stabilize the bank. And I only did it for 1 year, and it got things started in some of the really bad places. And if we have a straight bank like this, our tool of animal impact, set up a temporary fence there or something, and as the cattle come over that, they'll slope that off, because grass can't grow on a straight bank. It has to be sloped like here. You see this grass growing on this bank, so it's not that bad. But all this pretty much takes care of itself if you get the animals mimicking nature, and in one spot for no longer than 2 weeks, preferably less than 10 days. That's all up to the conservation district in their design, but I know they'll have some check structures, the kind of beaver dam analogs, probably slowing the water down, raising the bed elevation. Once you get the bed elevation of the creek raised and that lateral bank storage of the water, then those plants will increase just like their irrigation. Will increase your production. And then if you have a high flow, you get that energy out of the creek. You can see how this is now. If you have a high flow, this water is coming down and just banging into the walls and cutting and down cutting. But once we get to bed elevation, that high flow goes out on the floodplain, takes your energy out of the channel so that the channel doesn't get cut. So here again, we have nothing special going on. Just managing time and timing of the animals so that they're not here too long. You can see all this, the Baltic rush established right at the green line. That'll catch sediment. Then you can see where the sedges come in from previous years that the Baltic rush caught the sediment and just building bank. And here you can see good willows coming in all the way back to cottonwoods up on the drier side of the hill. And then here we're standing right on a cut bank, the kind of thing that keeps the energy of rivers gouging and cutting. So this is the lower end of Little Creek. And so these, if you were to cut these willows, they would all be less than 5 years old. This is probably 3 years old. One of the ways you do with ponderosa is you can count, like those are, this would be 1 year, that'd be 2 years, this would be 3 years, 4 years. But when you're grazing where willows are, our primary objective is not to graze the second year wood. The first year wood is fine. It's not going to hurt anything. That plant's healthy. It's going to come back next year very good. But if you graze down here and got into this, that would be grazing third year wood, and we don't want to see that. You can see it takes some abuse. They've got some broken, but that's mimicking nature. If you were here all summer long, after 2 or 3 years, there wouldn't be any willows here at all.
Tony, why don't you want to graze that second year wood?
Just because we want to grow willows, we want the wood structure
Okay.
there. And if you graze second year wood, that takes the willow backwards.
Okay.
And if you just graze the first year wood, it actually stimulates it.
Mm-hmm.
You can see that right here. This was grazed, first year wood, and then you have that. What I tell people to think about is the tree in their backyard. You go back and you prune it, you just have this tree just explodes, blooms. But if you went and pruned it once a week all summer long, you kill it. There's no tree left. And that's the way this is. You graze that first year wood, and it stimulates growth. But if you were here all summer long, it would keep grazing, and that'd be grazed right down into here. At the time, it seems like, in my experience, if you're grazing hot season where you want to promote willows, getting into the second year wood coincides with about 6-inch stubble height. Now, this is taller now, but they haven't been here for quite a while. That's regrowth. But when they were in here and we moved out, there was still a 4 to 6 inch stubble height. And if we'd stayed longer, then they'd have been getting into that second year wood more than third year wood. If you want to knock off the bank, it needs to be in the spring when everything is soft and kind of muddy. In the fall, what's important if you're on willows is when it frosts, sugars rise. And the cattle would just annihilate these willows. They would just eat them down to stubs. So after frost, you want to keep the animals off them where you want willows until all the leaves have fallen off. Once all the leaves have fallen off, then you can stay there through the winter.
Okay.
Okay. So the water cycle begins where the raindrop hits the earth. And like I said, to sustain a river, it begins at the ridgetop. The ridgetop on both sides of the river, right up at the top. And the first step to sustaining a river is getting that raindrop into the earth. When it rains, three things can happen. It will evaporate, it will erode, or it will soak into the soil mantle. And we want it to soak into the soil mantle, recharge springs, aquifers, and grow more grass. The next slide shows us how we do this. 5 steps. We need 5 steps to capturing the raindrop. First, we need ground cover so that when that raindrop comes crashing down out of the sky, it doesn't just hit the soil. The soil cover will break it up. And that also protects it from the sun so it doesn't evaporate. And then we want to incorporate that litter. We want hoof prints coming in here and knocking that down and getting it into the soil. And then we want it to decompose, because the decomposition is what builds soil organic matter. And soil organic matter is where you hold the water. It's kind of counterintuitive, but we need air. We need space in the soil for a place to hold the water. And so then we need rest for germination sites to and new seedlings to get started and grow and put down some root before you come back. And then finally, we come back and we disturb it again. So we disturb, rest, recover, disturb, rest, recover. So here's a good example of a ridgetop between Skull Gulch and Twin Creek in Wyoming. So this fence coming across here was just built this year. So we know that the foreground, this ground in the foreground, looked the same as that ground on the other side of the fence before that fence was built. And then in August, we had a foot of snow, and that snow blew about 800 head of cattle up into this corner and had a high animal impact event on that far side. So then the next spring, this is what you see. Where there was animal impacted, you have way more plant density, you have ground cover, and then in the foreground, you can kind of see where there's still a lot of bare ground if a raindrop hits. So that's where the building rivers begins, is up on this ridgetop. And then we talk about the road to the river. So we get that water slowed down up on the ridge. And then as we go down towards the river, there are places out in the sagebrush where you actually see willows start growing. It's just unbelievable. You provide the habitat and it'll come. Okay, this picture was a cow trail that was washed. And as soon as you start planned grazing, just in 1, 2, at least 3 years, you'll see all of these cow trails will grass in, and roads you used to drive on will grass in. It doesn't take much. Just take your foot off its throat. And so this area for years was just sand. We started doing planned grazing, and here you have sedges in the sand. Just having some recovery, getting your foot off the throat, and slowing that water down, and then you get sedges. Okay, so we talked about sloping the banks of the river. So this was a down-cut river. So just bring a salt block in here, bring animal impact, herd effect. Now, herd effect is when animal impact, they're not thinking about where they're placing their feet. Excuse me. So what is happening on this left picture here is what happened on the picture on the right, clear back up to where that shrub is, that willow bush, in the previous 4 or 5 years. And you can see it's completely got the water into the soil and growing feed instead of running down this cut bank ditch. So this is a really good picture showing the succession of a river. So in that video, we talked about the algae catching the sediment. So right where that dog is, you can kind of see in there that algae, and that will catch sediment as long as cattle aren't there grazing for too long, less than 10 days or definitely less than 20 days. Because if they're in longer than that, they keep coming in there to get a drink and they step on that and it rips it apart from the bank and wash down river, and then you start down cutting again. But the algae catches the sediment, and then the next year you have the rush. The Baltic rush comes in and kind of establishes that. And then in about 3 years, you'll have sedges come in. So as you're moving up this bank, going back, these are previous. So this has been healing for probably 10 years, this bank, and just keeps working down. So up here, let me see it. So the river bank was up here. And then, so like year 1 was like in here, year 2, you got in here, year 3, and then here we have the annuals, the rushes, year 4, and then down here, year 5 or 6, you got these algae. So you see that the width of the river has cut in like maybe 10%. So you have a river that used to be 20 feet wide. Now it's probably 5 or 6 feet wide. So you have the green line, the first step, get that green growth right at the low flow of the water line. Then we're concerned about width depth. We eventually want a 2-to-1 width depth and slope the banks because grass can't grow on a straight bank. And we have that here. And the bank building grass established there. And then the bed elevation will start to come up. Eventually, we want to see that low flow clear up here as that bed elevation comes up. And then when you have an event that the flow increases, it will run out onto the floodplain. It takes the energy out of it so you don't erode the river. Okay, let me see if I can figure out how to get rid of that. How do I do that?
I got him.
Okay, thank you. More technology than I can know what I'm doing. So this is a great picture of a river that has been improving for about 20 years with the help of beaver. And I have a calculation over here on the right about how important the soil organic matter is. Remember, we talked about the very top of the ridgetop. We need biological decomposition to build soil organic matter. 1% soil organic matter will store 16,500 gallons per acre and up to about 30,000 gallons, depending on the source. I think NRCS says like 28,000 gallons per acre. And so you do a calculation on what it takes to sustain a river. Now, the river doesn't start here. It starts on the ridgetop. So 1 cubic foot per second will run 1.98 animal feet or acre feet per day. So 365 days, 1 CFS will run 723 acre feet of water. So that you convert that to gallons and divide that by the low number of 16,500 gallons per acre, and that's about 20 acres. In 20 acres, you can store a year of that 1%. And then so on 14,460 acres at the low calculation, you can store enough water with 1% soil organic matter to run 1 cubic foot per second for 1 year. And a lot of people, I guess it's pretty well documented that holistic plan grazing will increase the soil organic matter by 1 to 2% in 3 to 5 years. And we've seen that consistently. So this riparian area that you see here, you've got that beaver dam, and you have lateral bank storage, water going out there. It on this particular ranch, 3% of the surface area was riparian areas. And in average years, that 3% of the ranch produced 35% of the total production. So when you talk about marginal reaction, that is the first place, the biggest bang for your buck you can get returns. But remember, it starts up on the ridgetop, not just right down here at the river. Okay. So building rivers begins on the ridgetops. We capture the raindrop. We have a grassy road to the river. We have a stable riverbank and bed elevation. And we're connecting the river to the floodplain. So how do we get that done? We get that done with a holistic grazing plan. We can plan all of these tools to sustain a river with a holistic grazing plan. And then once you have that, then you'll find that you'll need a holistic land plan so that you're able to manage that grazing plan effectively. And then we need to fund it. So you need a holistic financial plan. Next slide. And here's what you get. Okay, this is the ranch we're on in Wyoming. The picture on the left is where Twin Creek ran off our ranch after about 8 miles. And this picture was taken on a bridge where that ran off. And at the same moment, the photographer turned around and took the picture on the right on the other side of the bridge. And it's pretty stark contrast. The only difference is grazing planning and about 10 years of implementing that grazing plan on the left to the right.
Tony, could you please explain what it means to reconnect a river to the floodplain? Because like when you talked about width to depth ratio, it seems like you want to make the river smaller, but then you're talking about making a bigger riparian floodplain. Yeah, just explain what that means.
So a functional river, the low flow is at the level of the floodplain. So that when you have a rain event or a snow thaw event or some runoff, that excess water goes out onto the floodplain. So you don't have that energy churning down and cutting out the banks. And it will lay that sediment out on the floodplain. So when they've down cut so much like this picture here, it's kind of hard to imagine. But we have a little lower floodplain here that you could imagine it. So you keep narrowing the river banks And then as you get it down to that 2-to-1 width depth ratio, the bed elevation will start to rise. Now, it's really easy to imagine if you think about beavers. On this particular river, the beaver cycle was about 7 years. The beaver would come in, they would build a dam. That dam would sediment in about 7 years, and the beaver would leave. And so that would raise the bed elevation, 3 to 5 feet, depending on how big the dam was. And then in about 10 years, 10 to 15 years, the beaver would come back and put in another dam, and that would raise the bed elevation again. So it's just you have to remember that the function of a river is to export sediment to the ocean. So as a rancher, we want more production and water. So our whole challenge is to slow the flow. We want to slow it down from, we don't want the sediment to get to the ocean as fast as it would if you had dysfunctional rivers. Like on that river on the right-hand side, that's just going to go smoking out of there. On the left-hand side, it's going to get caught in the grass, the green line, going to catch it. Even if there's not a beaver dam, it's going to choke it off, and sediment will drop out and raise the bed elevation. Does that answer your question?
I kind of know the answer. Did anybody else need to know that? Just note that it is the same river. So it's Twin
Yeah,
Creek.
it's just looking upstream and downstream in the same spot.
Okay, you got about 15 minutes. Is there?
Perfect.
Oh,
You ended
question.
exactly on time, Tony.
Wow.
So
I'm
good.
impressed.
Good coaching.
Well, I would love to invite folks to pop questions into the chat or raise your hand if you would like to ask Tony a question. Oh, Tony, you were going to read a little excerpt from your book as well,
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that.
if you have it handy. I'm going to put in a plug for Tony's books. It's one of my favorites, although I was very late to reading it. I think it took me a couple years, but it's just such Green Grass in the Spring. It's such a beautiful account of Tony's life and work, and has some great insights about land management. It's just a pretty interesting story, honestly.
So what we've been talking about is the water cycle from the ridgetop to the river and how that works. And why is this so difficult? Why do we have such a hard time doing these things? Everything about holistic management is beneficial, but it's really difficult for people to get started. And here's a passage in this book that I hope captures this. It's one paragraph on page 86. I spent a good deal of time walking. I would leave the ranch house with a book and climb to a ridge somewhere above the problems of the day. I could see more from the ridge tops. I let my thoughts soar with the eagles and possibility. When the sun slipped toward the Wind River Mountains, I would slide down a canyon and drift home as my thoughts slid into the arroyos of my mind. Just as cattle drift and overgraze the canyon floors, just as water wears a crevice in the easiest route to the ocean, my behavior would gravitate toward old habits and traditions. It takes effort to keep raindrops and cattle up on the ridges, but it's even tougher to keep our thoughts there.
Thank you, Tony. We have a question here from Siobhan. She says, Tony, in New Zealand, farmers are incentivized to fence our animals from riparian areas, and that's definitely the same here in most of the Western US. Um, Fence our animals from riparian areas and plant trees. Will not these areas eutrophy and the stream shift into the paddocks?
What was that last sentence? That
Uh,
last,
uh, will not these areas eutrophy and the stream shift into the paddocks?
I don't know if I'm understanding that question, but I've had much experience where people have fenced off creeks and planted shrubs and planted trees, and I can do it much faster without the fence and with planned grazing. And especially in brittle environments. Maybe a non-brittle environment, you can get away with that. But in brittle environments, if you fence off a stream in about 3 to 5 years, you can get away with it. It's actually going to be a good thing. It's going to help get some vegetation established. But after 3 to 5 years, this wolfy grass will start dying from overrest. Bare ground will increase, and you start seeing weeds come in. In Wyoming, it was Canada thistle. In Oregon, it's teasel. If you want to know how to grow teasel, just fence off a riparian area in Wyoming. And so you need animals to graze at and maintain it. And the woody species, natural germination process is later than the grass grows in the spring. So if you want natural recruitment of the woody species, you need an early spring grazing to take that early herbaceous growth off so that sunlight can get to the woody seedlings. And then after the woodies get up and growing, if you come in during the hot season grazing, it is fine, but that's when you want to monitor the 6-inch stubble height and have a zero tolerance for grazing the second year wood. So fencing off riparian areas is excluding management. I would rather include management. Did that answer your question?
Siobhan says thanks. Yeah, I think something that like you do a good job of kind of weaving through as a theme in your book too, Tony, is this idea of the necessity of disturbance as part of a cycle. And it's about finding like the right amount of disturbance. And sometimes that's very minimal or almost absence, but like there's also this symptom of overrest, like when there isn't enough disturbance either in our in our own personal lives or when we're managing ecosystems, we kind of fall into this complacency, and there's a fine edge to find there, I think, of just the right amount of disturbance to keep things progressing.
And just to add to that, Beth, is that when we're doing work with people who are typically anti-livestock folks in riparian areas, and there's a reason why. I mean, cattle and sheep have hung out, and it's not the cow, it's the how kind of thing. I think everybody kind of knows that. But what we, instead of talking about livestock grazing, we talk about disturbance. And so it's getting the idea out of it being grazing or animal impact to just the simple disturbance that totally clicks, at least with ecological thinkers on riparian areas. They're used to seeing floods. I don't think they'd be very cool hearing Tony say, "Oh, when it's kind of muddy, you like bring a whole bunch of cattle in there and slough off the banks." They might not love that analogy.
Any other folks have questions for Tony? Feel free to pop them in the chat, or if you want to be brave and come on camera and on mic, you can ask one in person.
Tony, I was wondering if you could talk more about how you manage animal health in wetlands. You've mentioned before that, like, having the cows on the floodplain is not necessarily always good for the cows, but it has to do with timing. Just to talk more about the cows.
Animal health in general really benefits from planned grazing. For years, when we did our financial plan, we would plan for a 3% death loss or just loss of cattle. It was never really that much usually, but we usually always had 1.5%. And then you start planning grazing, and when you concentrate cattle, you concentrate labor. So your total labor costs go down, and rather than having to ride 50,000 acres to see 1,000 head of cattle, you can go look at 700-800 acres and see 1,000 head of cattle. And the cattle are always moving on to fresh ground, clean ground. So you have less pink eye, you have less foot rot, you don't lose cattle because they want to stay with the herd. So the last 10 years at Twin Creek, for a 10-year period, we had 0.03% death loss in unaccounted cattle. So it's not just on the wetlands. What I started doing, I turned things upside down on riparian areas. Like before holistic management, I would take cattle to a pasture and I would try to drive them into the back corner of the pasture. Just caused a lot of stress moving the cattle back and forth. But then after practicing holistic grazing planning, I would bring the cattle in and put them on the riparian area. And they urinate, defecate, foul the ground, and then they want to leave. So you come out the next day, pick them up and move them out until their head drops. When their head drops, leave them be. And in day 3 or 4, they want to be in the back corner of the pasture. And then you move to the next spot. So the health issues on the river, I don't think is any different than anywhere else. You're avoiding having animals stand in their own defecation and low quality forage. Does that answer the question? Aaron's going to ask a question.
Yes. Well, thank you for your presentation. I have really enjoyed it and I'm excited to read your book. I'm curious what your take is on prescribed fire as a disturbance in riparian areas and just in general.
Yeah, it's a tool that we can use, and we just want to run it through our context filters and see if we're treating a symptom or addressing the root cause of problems. The first thing we need to consider is that fire takes the nutrients and the plant material that could be going to build soil organic matter and build soil, and we have that going into the atmosphere. The only situation I've seen in the arid environments in Western US, you have these huge sagebrush that grows down on riparian areas that have been degraded for years and years and years. And a cow can't get up and get a hoof on that. Now, when there were mastodons here, they probably did. Mastodons could probably get a hoof on that and knock that down. And so I think fire would have been a good tool there. So in my opinion, fire is kind of like mob grazing. It's kind of goes through these stages. It's kind of the cool thing to do. Anybody that somebody is burning or they're doing mob grazing without thinking it through the context of their situation. That's the unfair competitive advantage that holistic management has, is thinking any action through in the context of your situation. And no other situation in the universe is the same as that. And if it passes, good, do it. And then pay attention to what the results were. See if you got the result that you wanted. And if you did, do it harder and faster. If you didn't do it, if it didn't work the way you wanted, stop doing it.
All right. Well, that's great advice to end on, Tony. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge. Thank you all for contributing your time to this conversation. And I popped a couple links in the chat. You can sign up for our newsletter to stay in the loop on future offerings. Um, all of our online courses are sliding scale, as I mentioned, so it's pay what you can. We really, really want to focus on building community and getting this knowledge and technical information out to folks for this next year. That's our big focus and goal. So um, please join us for our upcoming trainings. And stay tuned for the other good free stuff we have coming too. Uh, yeah, you'll get an email shortly with the recording of this webinar and all the resources that were mentioned. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
See y'all.
See ya.
Okay, there's a couple hangers on here. I'm gonna kick them out, I think. Oh, I don't want to put in waiting room. Put in waiting room. Put in waiting room. There we go. Okay. Well, other than the technical snafus of trying to do all of this from my computer, that went pretty good.
Stop the recording.
Oh yeah.